A man disappeared into New Jersey. 5 years later, federal fugitive hunters caught up with him, and the arrest ties back to a killing that had sat unsolved since 2021. According to the U.S. Marshals Service, with reporting from NBC Connecticut and WTNH, a New Jersey man is now in custody in connection with a 2021 murder in Hamden, Connecticut. He's been charged, not convicted. Like anyone accused of a crime, he's presumed innocent unless a court finds otherwise. Here's what we'll cover. What's actually known about the 2021 case, how a federal fugitive task force tracks someone down years after a crime, what a case like this usually looks like from the inside while it sits open, and what happens now that an arrest has been made. Start with what's confirmed. In 2021, a homicide happened in Hamden, a town just outside New Haven. Local police opened an investigation at the time. What the public record shows now, years later, is the next chapter of that investigation. The U.S. Marshals Service, working with local authorities, located and arrested a New Jersey man in connection with the killing. NBC Connecticut and WTNH, two regional outlets that cover Connecticut law enforcement closely, reported the arrest as tied directly to the 2021 case. Beyond that, the specific evidence that led investigators to this suspect, the exact charges filed, and the man's identity as released by authorities all belong to the official case record and court filings, not to speculation. Anyone following this should treat the primary sources as the final word, not secondhand summaries. What can be explained honestly, without guessing at facts nobody has confirmed, is how a case moves from a years-old open file to an arrest, and what those years in between usually look like for the people working it. Picture what a Hamden detective's desk actually looks like on a case like this. It isn't one dramatic breakthrough. It's a file that gets pulled back out every few months, sometimes because a new detective inherits the unit and reviews old cases with fresh eyes, sometimes because a tip line gets a call that doesn't pan out but still gets logged, sometimes because forensic evidence that couldn't be tested in 2021 becomes testable by 2023 or 2024 as lab technology improves. Homicide units generally don't get to formally close a case just because the trail goes cold in public view. The file stays open, gets re-reviewed on rotation, and waits for exactly the kind of break that apparently happened here, a location on a suspect who'd left the state, the U.S. Marshals Service runs one of the country's main fugitive apprehension operations. Unlike a local police department, which is usually tied to a single jurisdiction, the Marshals specialize in cases where a suspect has crossed state lines, exactly the kind of gap that can stall a homicide investigation for years. When a suspect in a case like Hamden's isn't in Connecticut anymore, local detectives typically ask for federal help because the marshals have both the legal authority and the interstate reach to chase someone who's relocated. That process usually leans on tools that have become standard in fugitive work. Tips from the public, database cross-references against known associates and addresses, financial and utility records showing where someone resettled, and increasingly digital trails like cell activity, social media, and vehicle registrations that a person can't fully erase just by moving states. Task forces also often coordinate with U.S. postal inspection records, state motor vehicle databases, and employment or licensing records, since a person still generally needs an address, a job, and some form of official documentation to function day to day, even while keeping a low profile. None of that is unique to this case. It's simply how interstate fugitive investigations work now, and it's why a case that looks cold on paper can still move once a task force picks it back up. Here's the part that seems odd on the surface. A case can look completely stalled for years and still be active. Investigators don't necessarily walk away when a file goes quiet in the press. Often the work keeps going out of public view, waiting on one lead, one database match, or one tip to reopen the path forward. What stands out about a case like this isn't any one person. It's the system behind it. An arrest years after a crime isn't proof that police finally did their job. It's usually proof that unsolved doesn't mean unworked. Homicide cases without an immediate suspect tend to stay open indefinitely at the state level, and a name resurfacing after years usually means new information came in, not that someone got lucky. It's worth sitting with what the wait looks like for the people closest to a case like this. In an unsolved homicide, the victim's family typically doesn't get regular public updates, not because investigators don't care, but because departments generally avoid disclosing anything that could compromise an active case. That often means years of periodic check-in calls, occasional meetings with a detective, and long stretches of silence that can feel like nothing is happening even when the file is technically still being worked. Victim advocacy units attached to prosecutors' offices often serve as the main point of contact during that gap, relaying what can be shared and managing expectations about timelines that are, by nature, unpredictable. When an arrest finally comes, it's common for it to land on a family with almost no warning because investigators can't tip their hand before an apprehension is secured. That raises a fair question for anyone following cases like this. How much should the public expect transparency versus patience from investigators on an open homicide? Agencies often stay quiet for years, not because nothing is happening, but because early disclosure can tip off a suspect or compromise a prosecution. Where do you think that line should sit? As for where this stands right now, the man has been arrested and is expected to be arraigned. Because he was arrested in New Jersey on a Connecticut case, the process from here typically involves extradition, the legal process that moves a defendant from the state where they were arrested to the state prosecuting the case before any Connecticut court proceedings can move forward. That process can take time on its own and is governed by court procedure, not by the marshals or by local police. Extradition in a case like this usually unfolds in stages, and it helps to understand them so the timeline doesn't seem mysterious. First, the arresting state, here New Jersey, holds an initial appearance where the defendant is informed of the out-of-state charges and the extradition request. The defendant can waive extradition, which speeds things along, or contest it, which can add weeks or months while the matter is reviewed by a governor's office on each side, under interstate extradition law that's existed in some form since the country's founding. Only after that step clears does the defendant get physically transferred to Connecticut custody, where the formal arraignment on the homicide charge happens in front of a Connecticut judge. Bail, if any, is set, and the appointment of defense counsel typically happen at that Connecticut arraignment, not before. Worth repeating plainly, the charges reported here are allegations. Under the law, the man is presumed innocent, and nothing in this video should be read as a statement about his guilt. What's confirmed is that an arrest was made, that it connects to the 2021 Hamden case, and that the matter now moves into Connecticut's court system. What isn't public yet, and what this video won't guess at, includes the specific evidence tying him to the case, the exact charges filed against him, his identity as released in official documents, and the timeline of the investigation between 2021 and now. Those details, if and when they're released, will come from the Connecticut Judicial Branch's case records, from the U.S. Marshals Service's own statements, or from continued reporting by NBC Connecticut and WTNH, not from summary videos like this one. It's also worth being upfront about what a case like this generally doesn't resolve quickly, even after an arrest makes headlines. A homicide prosecution built on an investigation spanning several years often involves witnesses whose memories or availability have changed, evidence that has to be re-authenticated for court, and pretrial motions that can stretch on for months before a trial date is even set. An arrest is a milestone in the process, not the end of it. It's common for a case like this to generate very little additional news for a long stretch afterward, simply because the legal process moves at its own pace, mostly outside public view, until formal hearings get scheduled. If more official detail comes out on this story in the coming weeks, check the sources listed below yourself rather than taking any single video's word for it, including this one.